Good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of Doctor2Doctor in the chat room. We are so happy that you guys come back every week to share this hour with us. When you do that, then we get to do this, and we are so appreciative of that. I cannot begin without saying Happy Father's Day to all the fathers and the dads around the world, those that have had their own and those that have stepped up to the plate and been fathers to others. We appreciate you. We salute you. Hats off to you. And I have to say a very, very special thanks and happy Father's Day to my daddy-o, Representative Johnny Shaw, Reverend Johnny Shaw, the man. Hey, daddy-o, I love you. Happy Father's Day. Thank you for everything that you have been to me. And I'm sure my brothers, those are my brothers' sentiments as well. So thank you. We have some really special guests in the chat room. And they will have an opportunity, if they have anyone that they would like to shout out, they'll have an opportunity to do that. But in the meantime, we have a very different but so interesting, a very interesting topic today, because I hear so many of my family members, so many of my friends, trying to trace family history. And today we have the author of Pieces of Me, Patriotism, Miss Stephanie Miller. She is going to be chatting it up with us today. I have a tag team co-host, Miss Veronica Nealy-Morris, who has been here with us before, and we've been able to chat it up a couple of times. But just a little bit about Stephanie before we move forward. Stephanie advocates for the empowerment of women, young girls, and persons with disabilities, civil rights, and family history. Stephanie has over 30 years experience in the field of nursing and 23 years experience as Chief Executive Officer of her own agency that provides life coaching, and direct support professionals. She has the passion for the process to increase the capacity of individuals to make choices and transform those choices into desired actions and outcomes. She is the vice president of a nonprofit organization called Keep It Simple Saints Ministry. Stephanie has been serving as a genealogist for over 22 years with a special interest in non-paternity events and adoption cases. She is a national board member of the Society of the First African American Families of English America, chapter board member of the Daughters of the American Revolution and the National Society Daughters of the Union, 1861 to 1865, a member of the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society and National Genealogical Society. She loves to travel, and I do too, and spend time with her family and friends. Yes, yes, yes. Thank you, Stephanie, for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and thank you, Veronica, for being here, tag teaming with me. And thank you for connecting me with Miss Miller, because I'm excited to hear about this topic, because after having a little chat offline with Stephanie, I realized that the genealogy piece of it is much deeper. It's a little bit deeper than us just trying to trace who our family members are. And I want to learn more about it today. So let's start with what inspired you to delve into genealogy and eventually write a book about it. Let's start with that.
Okay, well, thank you for having me on, and happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there.
Yeah.
It would be nice to say that my fascination with genealogy started at a young age. When I used to listen to stories told by my grandparents, they would speak about our ancestors, where they came from, the hardships they faced, and their achievements. But nah, that didn't happen. I didn't have this conversation with my grandparents. What happened was, it was a conversation between my mother and a family friend of her. She was of German descent. And my mother mentioned to her that, well, we have ancestors named Shakespeare's. Surprisingly, the woman responded by saying she never heard of the German surname Shakespeare. So maybe your ancestors referred to Sheikh's Negro or the other derogatory terms. So she was saying that we were called Sheikh's Negroes, but the other term. So that's what got me inspired to find out why we call Sheikh Snyders. So that's what started my genealogy. Sheikh Snyder is my mother's maternal surname. Her father was Vilmot Sheikh Snyder. So I started with him, going on Ancestry and on the internet, trying to find out who he was by going through the census, found out that he was in the United States Color Troop. So he was of color. And then I found out, I went to Louisiana, where he's from. I went to the courthouse and found his slave owner's will. The will listed his name as Vilmot Sheikh Snyder. The slaveholder, which name was Sheikh Snyder. So that's why, so it wasn't Sheikh's Negro, but he was named Sheikh Snyder legitimately.
Yeah.
We found out after DNA that he was the son of the Sheikh Snyder slaveholder. So his name, Sheikh Snyder, was legitimately owned to him. That's why he chose that as a name after war, because that was his father's surname. So that's what started me in researching genealogy.
Yeah, you know, and like, go ahead. I'm sorry.
But the pieces of me, patriotism, this is my father's side of the story. His mother and father came from Maryland. So I wrote the book about his side of the family. So I spent 25 years on my mom's side of the family. Now I've spent the last 12 years on my dad's side of the family. I have shared my dad's side. So yeah, up to him. So that's where this book's about, my dad's side of the family of Maryland.
Interesting. Like I said, when we started the show, there are so many people trying to trace family history, maybe not even getting into the genealogy piece. So what advice would you give someone on this journey that's trying to start this journey of researching their roots?
It's easy. You start with what you know. You start with yourself. You collect your birth certificate. You collect your marriage certificate, your divorce certificate. You put that in a file. Then you go to your mother and your father. You get their birth certificate. You get their divorce, the marriage certificate and the divorce certificates. All these pieces of documentations will have lists, maybe their parents' names, will list maybe where they were born, will list maybe where they were placed in birth. You find out they're the third child. So, you know, oh, there was a first and second sibling that my mother had that you might not have never known. So these little information on the documents are just easy to start out with. Then you go further back, but begin with, you start with yourself, and then you work your way back. As I mentioned in my book, my grandmother and my great-grandmother, they wanted to tell me oral history, but I was a teenager at the time, so I wasn't ready to hear it.
Yeah.
They honestly felt that I was going to be the historian, so they wanted to tell me, but like I said, I didn't want to hear it, so they dropped it. When I found out that I had the calling, it was too late. They had already passed. So all that firsthand history is gone. So I advise people to interview your older relatives now. Get a recorder. You don't have to go there with a list of things to say to them. Just sit down with them and ask them, well, games you play as a child? What was your favorite meal? Simple questions like that will give you so much history about that family, and they will start talking to themselves and give you more information than you even expected. So again, start with your older relatives that are living now before it's too late.
I so regret, I mean, gosh, I had a grandmother, two grandmothers that were very sharp, in their right minds, longevity to their lives. And I should have been paying attention. And that's one of my huge regrets. I do remember a lot of the things that they were saying, but I don't remember names, you know, names that a lot of even, say, my parents may not even, you know, necessarily remember now. I was like, man, you know, they should write these things down. And you are helping me, you are encouraging me to ensure that I provide and pass on information to my grands, to my children.
We all have pictures that we don't know who the person is, who this is in the picture.
Yeah.
That's why we need to start labeling our pictures. So when our great-grandchild looks at the picture, they're looking back and say, oh, that's my third cousin, you know?
Yeah.
Because we labeled it for them.
Yeah.
That way they know, when they get their grad pictures, they'll know who these people are. Where we have pictures, we don't know who they are. So there's lost people. We have them, we know they're related, but we don't know their name.
Veronica, have you started this journey?
You know, that's a great question. Yes, I have started, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted Miss Miller to be a part of this show, is because I've had some challenging times just trying to get the information from my family. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like Miss Miller mentioned in her book, and I'm not going to tell everything about the book, right? You have to go out and purchase it. That a lot of family members, they have these secrets, and for whatever reason, they don't want to tell you that that's not your real grandfather.
Mm.
And so yeah, I did start, and we've run into a lot of challenges, but I think it was last year, Stephanie presented me with a huge binder of genealogy, and I found out that I had family members, a whole list of them here, right here in Tampa. So she's still working on it. We were supposed to be, we're planning to take a trip to Alabama, and she's going to go into the, what are the records, the Hall of Records, or what,
The courthouses.
the courthouses. So yes, I have started, and let me tell you, it has empowered me so much because I watch a lot of Stephanie talks that she's had with the DARS. And one of the questions that I asked her, because when she first told me that she was a daughter of American Revolution, I said, well, you know, that was a negative term for me. But then she explained to me why she did it. And do you mind explaining that? Because that is a part of your book.
I belong to Daughters of American Revolution because it's my fifth great grandfather, who's an African American. It was a patriot in the American Revolution War. So I joined the organization is to represent him, to put it in the records. Because now when you join Daughters of American Revolution, your lineage from your patriot to yourself goes into the big book of history.
Wow.
So now so he's not a forgotten patriot. He's listed, and his descendants are listed also. So anybody who wants to go see James Dew, they'll be able to see all his descendants, and that he fought, and he was also a prisoner of war during the time in the wars also. That's all in the book also.
Yeah. Go ahead, Veronica. I'm sorry.
One of the things that inspired me in doing that and continue to do my search is that one of the things Stephanie said is that she did not want what our ancestors did in the past to be marginalized, to say that we are true Americans and we did our part to say that we are Americans and we don't have to go back to what have you. But she, you know, I've gotten, as a matter of fact, I got to meet an aunt who's 102 years old. So I wasn't sure how to ask questions, but Stephanie told me just start talking to her, you know, asking, what did you eat when you were younger? And then they really do start divulging information that you need, and they're not even aware that they're doing it. So she's simple for me, and I'm looking forward to find that family member so that I too can be a part of the DAR and teach my children how to do their genealogy.
Can you imagine this Black girl in 10th grade civics class learning about the American Revolution War? Has she known that she had a fifth great grandfather that fought, how that would have been much empowering for her to know that my great grandfather was out there fighting. You know, he was trying to fight for against the British for freedom, but also he was trying to fight for the enslaved, for them to have freedom. So he thought the bishop was going to do, but that didn't happen. But that's what he was fighting for. You know, had I known that at 10th grade, I would have been more interested in history at that time. It wouldn't be just their side of the story.
So back to what Veronica said, you know, people are afraid this is going to come out and all that. This is why I always say it's so important that we know. And I realize even just this much small of a conversation that we've had, just how important it is and how much deeper it is than what I've ever thought, right? Because I always have said, like, people need to know who their dad is. People need to know who their mom is, you know, who their real mom is. Now, you know, regardless of what else comes with that, we need to understand who our folks are. I've always thought, well, you know, because I don't want to marry my brother, or I don't want to, you know what I mean, or something like that. But it's much deeper. It's much deeper.
It's our history. It's our history.
Yeah. Like you said, if I thought history was so boring, I ain't gonna even lie. And part of that has to do with I wasn't getting my history. And listening to you, the other piece of that is it could have been more relatable had I known how close to home some of that stuff was really hitting, you know?
And it would have given us a sense of pride, because when the Obama girl said that my daddy was the president of the United States and how proud that is. So when I'm able to tell my grandkids, and Tiffany's grandkids are able to say that my great great grandfather was a part of such and such, I have proof. It's in the book. So it's so important. One of the things that I regret, and I had started going to secondhand stores and looking in old Bibles, because back then that was our history book, but we've gotten so advanced, we've thrown those things away. So now when I go into an old relative house, that's the first thing I look at. Where's your Bible? Because all of our date of birth, marriage certificate, everything was in the Bible.
You know, I still have one of those.
Wow.
And do you know that's where I store my, as I'm going to say as young as I am, I'm 57, I store my children's, both my kids know if they come to me for their birth certificate, it's in the big, thick Bible.
Well, your daddy is a pastor.
We all know that one relative who has all the funeral bulletins. Yeah. That's a landmine. That's it. You need to go there and get your little scanner and scan all the bulletins. They list where they were born. They list family members. They list what church they belong to. No, so I know
great information. Yes. Yeah.
And Ms. Shaw, Dr. Shaw, you should have more than anybody, because I'm sure your father has officiated many funerals.
Yes.
And normally we look at that family member that keep all the obituary as if there's something wrong with them, but you're absolutely right, because they name the family members.
So Aunt Peggy, if you're listening, because I know you're that family member and I know you listen every week, I'm coming for that Bible and for those obituaries, ma'am. So let's talk about some of the challenges you've encountered in researching genealogy compared to other ethnic groups, the African-American genealogy.
One of the main changes is name changes. Enslaved individuals frequently experience name changes, either due to the whims of the slaveholder or because of their gaining freedom. So this makes challenges to follow that line to them because they changed the name. Like per se, my mom's family, her father's side is Glovers. Well, I found a documentation that says why their name's Glovers. It's because the father didn't like the last slaveholder that had him, so he liked the first one, so he wanted to be named after the first slaveholder. So it could be different reasons why they chose a name, but the names do change. So that's one of the problems with African American thing. But be patient, and you will get the answers by finding documentations. One of the things about DNA, I found relatives, my dad's relatives, who live in Louisiana. His family all from Maryland. Well, because of the slave trade, children were sold off to Louisiana and started a new life in Louisiana. So they don't know that they start out in Maryland. So those are things that, because our families are been sold off to places, that's gonna be hard. South Carolina, that was known for breeding. They had 1, 2 males, and they would impregnate 14, 15 different women and have children. So there's gonna be sometimes we won't be able to find the traces to that person that we have in common ancestor, but we can find a locality that we are related.
We're at a break. If there are other challenges, we're going to talk about those on the other side of the break. We will be right back on Doctor to Doctor in the chat room right here on 94.7 FM in just a moment. And we are still here on Doctor to Doctor in the chat room on 94.7 FM. I am talking to Ms. Stephanie Miller, author of Pieces of Me, Patriotism. Before we went to break, you were talking about some of the challenges that you've encountered when researching African-American genealogy versus other ethnic groups. Can you talk more about some of those challenges, please?
Yes, the lack of birth, marriage, and death records for African Americans during the era of slavery is not there. So what you can do is you can rely on other sources like church records. The enslaved were able to go to church, so there were church records. There are the plantation records. You might have a slaveholder who listed my slave Tom, who's married to so and so. So those things can be found. It's just might not the vital statistics areas, but you'll be able to find it in different things. Just don't think out of the box.
Okay.
Oral history plays a crucial role in African-American genealogy. So that's why we need to talk to our people.
Think
And
out
they'll
of
say,
the
I don't
box
know
and
anything, but
don't give up, right? Because
don't
I
give
think
up.
that's my problem. I just get frustrated, like, this is as far as I'm gonna get, you know?
Like working with Veronica, she has particular stories she'd like to talk about.
Okay.
Well, thank you. Stephanie is my genealogist, so she's working on family genealogy for me. And we got to a roadblock. I emailed and I texted and I tried to communicate with a lot of my family members, and they were not able to give me any information. But through the process of Stephanie doing her work, and she's so good at it, I was able to meet a cousin who was last name was Gamble. And I said, well, why can't we connect the dots? And then he began to tell me the story that his real name was a different name. I think it was Shaw. And the reason why he changed his name because he was on the run. So he changed. That's how we got that gap in the dot, and we were able to put that back together. So that was so fascinating to me. So now I'm encouraged to stay the course. It's like Miss Stephanie Miller said, don't give up. The information is out there.
Yeah. Talk about, share some strategies or resources that have been particularly helpful in tracing African-American family history, Stephanie.
Like in Veron's case, we pretty much tap the internet stuff. So we're pretty much can't find any more. So we have to go into the local courthouses in Alabama and archives to visit things. So after you go to the internet and try to find everything in there, you stop, can't find any more. That's when you got to get up and go to that state, go to the courthouses to look at the records. Look at when you're at the census. When you're at the census, you see where your ancestors lived at. You see who lived above them, because that might be another family member. Or that might be the slaveholders. I'm talking about like the 1870 census. The people that above them might be the slaveholder. So you get that name, and then you research that name, and you might find some plantation records for them. And then you might find your ancestor listed in that. So African newspapers. Back in Reconstruction, we started getting African newspapers. They list everything. They visit the town. This person had this person visit them. African American history newspapers give you a lot of information. You have to find which particular newspapers was around that area. But this back in the like 1920s, 1930s, they list a lot of information there too. So we have to think out of the box. Don't think you can be in front of the internet and find everything. You have to go research. You have to go to the courthouses. You have to go to the archives to get the information.
It's kind of like faith, huh? You got to put some legwork on there. So yes. How receptive are people to folks coming into towns and saying, hey, I want to go to the courthouse and look at how receptive are people to that? I mean, what do you run into some issues in that instance?
Genealogy happens to be one of the top hobbies in the United States right now. So the courthouses are familiar with it. The courthouses are familiar answering the phone, and somebody from Hawaii calling Alabama says, do you have this? Do you have that? They are very gracious. They're used to it. They're willing to help you.
Okay. So I've gotten this 23andMe kit. I've gotten the Ancestry, whatever it is. What role does DNA testing play in African-American genealogy research, and what should individuals consider when using the DNA services?
Oh, good question. As in my book, I show how genetic DNA testing enables African-Americans to connect with genetic relatives who share a common ancestor with a time frame. Like you can go back and find a cousin who's like a third cousin. So you share an ancestor maybe 200 years ago. And so then you start talking to them, and they'll tell you their tree and your tree, and then you try to get it together and see, okay, how do we are common? So it's a lot of sharing between your DNA, I call them DNA cousins. By comparing DNA profiles with others in the database, you can find potential cousins, extended family members, or even distant relatives who may have additional information about their family history. Like my father, his paternal for Africa is Mandinka, and his maternal is Fulani. So when you get your 23andMe, you will find out what's your motherland. Being that you're a female, you won't find out what your fatherland is, but you will find out what your motherland is. Men do 23andMe will find out what their fatherland and the motherland, because they carry both. But we can only find out what our motherland is.
Okay.
So my father, he's related to King Ramses because the King Ramses has the same haplogroup as my dad. For African Americans whose ancestors forcefully brought to the Americas during transatlantic slave trade, DNA testing can offer insights into the African heritage and potentially identify specific ethnic groups or regions. It's important to note that DNA testing is just one tool. You're going to have to need everything else to go along with it. You're going to have to do the research. You're going to have to get the oral history to combine it all together. One is not just is not as strong. One, it has to have the other. You just can't rely on just on DNA testing.
Okay.
But it helps a lot. I have done a lot of research with DNA testing.
So I have a question about that, and if you have anything, Veronica, just jump in. So when I did the 23andMe, I'm getting these notifications all the time. I must have a gazillion billion third and fourth and sixth cousins. Like, it's stuff showing up all the time. What should I be doing with that information? Or is there a cutoff? Like, I don't know. I always feel like, okay, sixth cousin, do I really even want to, like, how should I use the information that I get?
Okay, with the sixth cousin, I would compare what cousins we are related to. So that's when you start finding your pattern there is what cousins, after you start your sixth cousin, then you go look, see what cousins, DNA cousins we have in common. Well, if you see that you have all white cousins, then you know that was a white ancestor. So that sixth cousin might have a list of surnames. So you might not know those surnames at this time, but go ahead and write them down somewhere because they're going to pop up one way or another during your research. So you're not going to be able to say, yeah, you're my sixth cousin, we're related by this person because it's too early. But if you take that information, save it. So then by the time you get back that far, then you can say, okay, yeah, I'm related to these.
Okay.
I have a question, Stephanie. We did a show a year or so ago, and it was on a Christian show like this one here. And one of the questions that were posed was, if I know Jesus is my Lord and Savior in his genealogy, why do I need to know my own? And you mentioned something about how important it is for us to know our own genealogy, along with know the Bible's genealogy of Jesus.
Right.
You said that
in the Bible, that's what you see. He begat he begat he begat he, because genealogy was important in the Bible. So why isn't your genealogy important? It's your history, it's who you are. So when we let go of that ancestors, those things, then that's it. It'll never be said again. So it's up to us to keep them alive as far as our history. We learned about George Washington. Okay. Today, we still learn about George Washington. We know what? We had ancestors who lived here at the same time. So why don't we know who the ancestors were that were there at the same time as George Washington? That's just important. That great-grandparent that lived next to George Washington is just as important as George Washington.
So you talked a little bit about this, going to talk to some of the older people or whatever, but talk more about that oral history and just simple family storytelling in the African American genealogy research.
Yes, oral history, as I did talk before about it, it's the same thing that is very important. You use oral history because it might, the family member might not have the dates right, they might not have the names right, but they're giving you a baseline to use. And that will help you into the research. Don't say, oh, they got that person wrong, so they don't know nothing. No, they just got maybe the name wrong. They might have been called something else at that time. What she calls Billy Joe, in the census, she might be Wilhelmina, but they call it Billy Joe for short. So you can't say, oh, she had information right. No, she had what she knew. So you take oral history and write it down. No matter what it is, you write it down. That's one thing I didn't do with my family when they spoke to me about stuff. I didn't ask more questions. For instance, for my grandmother, she was telling me that she was Native American. She said she was Cherokee Indian. Her father was Cherokee Indian. Well, I knew her father had straight hair and he was light skinned. So I said, no, that's your father, he's a grandson of some slaveholder. That's what that is. So I know everybody says they're Cherokee. Everybody says they got Cherokee grandmother, princess, and stuff. So that's hot. No. But years later, when I started researching, he was Native American.
Mm-hmm.
One of the historians of Native American was searching for my family so they can get more more answers from us.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt so small because my grandma had passed by then, to know that I doubted what she was telling me.
Yeah.
When I should have just sat there and just listened and be a good girl and wrote down what she's saying.
Yeah.
So the answers are there if you're willing to listen. You might not understand it at the time, but eventually you will understand it. It will come to you.
How receptive or excited or not excited have your parents been about you digging deeper and finding all this information?
Well, my mother was very excited about it, learning about her ancestors, because she pretty much didn't know anything besides other than her grandmother on her mom's side. That's all she knew. She no history whatsoever beyond that. So she was very receptive to it. My father, he was not, and that's why I wrote this book, was to have him read it. My father's 89 years old, so I wanted him to know somewhat of his history before he passes. That the little town that he come from, that his family has been there for 200 years, they are the natives of that area, Eastern Shore, Maryland. They were there before it became United States of America.
Mm-hmm.
They were contributing people of that area.
Mm-hmm.
But he wouldn't know that until I researched it.
Yeah.
And so that's why I've written this book for him.
Mm-hmm.
And for my future generations, my great-grandchildren, when they decide they get the call and want to learn, they don't have to start from scratch. They'll have it there.
Yeah. That's beautiful. How far have you gotten, Veronica? Are you deep into it now?
I would say I'm midway there. I'm still working towards getting. First of all, we've reached everything as it relates to the internet or what have you. So we have to make that trip to Alabama. So that's our next stage.
Mm-hmm.
It's just of getting a date that we can both go together.
Mm-hmm.
That is our next step.
Okay. What are some of the misconceptions or myths surrounding African American genealogy, Stephanie?
One of the myths is that they're all African Americans were enslaved, and that's not true. Some came from the Caribbean as free people of color. So you can't just think of looking for the plantation, the slaveholder, because you might find from 1600s there were free people that came here, and they had families.
Mm-hmm.
So don't just assume that your ancestors. I mean, you're going to have some ancestors who are enslaved. That's true, but not all of them might not necessarily have been enslaved. So you have to look at other sources to find your ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
Another one is that African Americans, most African Americans, have a good point of European ancestry in them. You cannot assume that European ancestry in you is because the slaveholder raped your great-great-grandmother. Yes, that's happened. There's cruelty, and that has happened. But what they don't tell you in school is that the indentured whites and the enslaved and the free people of color and the Native Americans, they all lived together. They all intermingled. They all had relationships. They even got married when it was time when they couldn't marry together in the 1600s, in the early 1700s. So it's not all due to, when you see that you got 20% white, 10% white, is because some slaveholder raped your ancestor. No, it might have been a relationship where they had. It might have been a white female that's your ancestor. That's common in Maryland. That a lot of the white ancestors are the white females who had sex with the enslaved or the free men of color. So those are misconceptions that we're learning now as we're going on. And we're learning that it happens a lot where now the white people who are doing their DNA see that 2% sub-Saharan African. So they're realizing, hey, somewhere down the line, there was an African in my family as well, because it was natural. But they're not telling you that.
This is fascinating, and it is totally eye-opening. Go ahead, Veronica. I mean, like totally eye-opening.
Even for me, and I read the book, and I've known it for years. Stephanie, have you ran into any complications trying to introduce yourself to some of your Caucasian relatives? Were they receptive?
Yes, it's a 50-50. It's really been 50-50. Ones that were receptive, they're very receptive. They wanted to meet me and this. And then there was ones that it's not true. I don't know why they're sending you in my direction. And this is before DNA testing. This was the Shake Snyders. They were saying, no, that you're not related to me. No, that's not true. I don't know why this researcher has sent you over to me, but it's not true. I did my DNA test, and guess what? The first one that came up on the DNA cousin was a Shake Snyder cousin. The one who said that wasn't true ends up being a cousin. So DNA has proven a lot of things that people didn't want to admit. So now it's now turning more receptive because DNA don't lie. So now they have to be sort of receptive to, because
it don't lie.
They don't lie.
It doesn't. I'm telling you, like, look, not just because I've watched enough forensic files, it just doesn't lie.
I know one of the problems I ran into, it's like older family members felt like we were digging up secrets and didn't really understand the motive behind it. And the only thing we knew was to find out who's your cousin so you won't marry them and have a retarded kid. And that's as far as we went. But now I want to know, because I want to know my history. I want to know my contributions. Just even watching President Obama become president, that empowered me. See the contributions that I've seen thus far in my family, that's empowered me. So when you're teaching the right history, and it's powerful, because now today, especially in certain people here in the state of Florida, they're trying to take that history out of the school books. But it's so important that we continue to have these oral conversations with our children. That's one of the things that I miss about everybody sitting around the table, because a lot of information was shared during those times.
Absolutely. We're at another break. It goes really quickly when it's good. And this is good. We will be right back in a moment on 94.7 FM. We are back on 94.7 FM. We were having some really good offline discussion, and I was like, nah, you can't say this now. We got to be on air. So I was talking about how Stephanie had mentioned, just because you have, Europeans in your family history or what, it doesn't necessarily mean that somebody had been, raped by a slave or something like that. And I was saying that was my initial thought when I saw that. And I'm getting those notifications from my 23andMe or my DNA ancestry DNA or whatever the kits that I got. But then after I got so many of those notifications, I was like, yeah, this thing is off, because pretty much that's what I get. And Stephanie explained to me that.
I'll explain to you that majority of the white Americans are here, that were here from the 1600s, 1700s, they came from indentured servants' ancestors. They were prisoners of England. They were prisoners of Francis. And what they did was dump the people over into America. And so they were not good enough for the plantation owners and stuff to associate with. So they associated with the free people of color, with the enslaved, with the Native Americans. So that's how we all became a mixture of people. So us being African American, yes, we have African ancestors, but we are also a mixture of European. So we are the first product of the United States, of a race. We are the race of the United States.
Wow. Before we move forward, and we'll do this again at the end of the show, just tell us where, just give us the name of your book again and tell us where we can find it.
Pieces of Me, Patriotism is volume 1, my genealogic journey of the Eastern Shore of Maryland, 1632 to 1832, and you can find it on Amazon.
Awesome. Are there any specific records or documents that are particularly helpful when researching African American genealogy? You've talked about birth certificates and marriage certificates. Are there any other documents that are particularly helpful?
What you can do online, there's several places online. There's a free site that you can go on. I'm not trying to give anybody a shout out, but you can find free sites and keep it. You can go and see federal census records. So you can see census records from 1790 to 1950. So you can go in there right now and go 1950 and find your mom, where she lived at, what street she lived at, how many people were in her household, where they lived in 1940, 1930, 1920. Those are the valuable things where you get the people and you find out the family members are there.
Mhm.
You find out what job they had. You find out, did they read or write English?
Mhm.
One census, it tells you they had a radio in the house because it was important for the war if they had a radio in the house. So the
Wow.
federal census is a very important document to start off to find things. Then it's the military records. If you have an ancestor that fought in the United States color troop, you can order their documents. And in that document, you'll find a lot of information, especially if they did a pension record. I ordered a pension record of my great-grandfather, Wilmot Shakespeare. In that pension record, I expected a little envelope with little stuff. It came a box of information. It told me his wife's name. It told me his children's name. It told me his slaveholder's name. It told me the midwife's name. It told me the reverend who married him, because he had to prove, well, his wife had to prove that she was his wife. So she had to get affidavits. And his slaveholder was one of the affidavit was talking about him, said, yeah, Belmont was my slave. And he came back after the war.
Yeah.
All that information was there for me. Like I said, the midwife. So now I know the midwife was Kitty. She birthed the children. And the reason why they know the birth dates, because it was the same day, same year as their sister's child. So I get to find out who the sister's name is and who her child is. So it opened up the whole entire family for me. It told me where the plantation was. It told me that he was, in what troop he was in the United States color troop. It has his words telling me stuff. It has her words telling me.
Wow.
Her daughter did the affidavit, so I have her words telling me about the family. So United States color troop, if he has a pension record, is very valuable too. The Freeman Burroughs record, I personally haven't found anybody in that, but people have found people in Freeman's Burroughs records. That's when, after the war, when the blacks needed help on things, they went to the Freeman Burroughs to help them. So that's documentation. You'll get names, list of family members in there. Manumission records, when the slaveholders decided to give them the freedom, that will list the freedom. It'll describe him. It'll say, what kind of scars he has, how tall he was.
Wow.
Certificate of freedom papers. So if your ancestor was free during slavery, he had to carry papers with him. In the paperwork, they'll have his description. They'll say, was he born free or was he mandated free? So all these documents will give you information about your family. And of course, vital records. We discussed that earlier about vital records, birth, marriage, death records.
Yeah, one of the things that I started to see this trend on my mom's side, I started to see a trend of midwives. On my dad's side, I started to see a trend of business owners, but they were more like carpenters or, something like that. I started to see this trend. I thought that was so fascinating. And then I hit a brick wall and I was like, okay, I don't know anything else to do.
Well, back to DNA, you're saying midwives, that's DNA that's in them. So if that goes down from generation to generation, that's the DNA that's following through.
Wow. Wow. Are there any organizations or communities that focus specifically on African American genealogy research and provide support or resources for this research?
Yes, there are several societies. There's Society of the First African Families of English America. That's a nonprofit lineage organization that unites descendants of African ancestry who lived in English American prior to March 5th, 1770. That's the date of the Boston Massacre and the death of Crispus Attucks. He was the first patriot casualty of the American Revolution, which he was Black. So that's where I belong to that. There's African American Genealogy Group. There is African American Historical Genealogical Society. There's the Midwest African American Genealogy Institute. Being, like I said, African Americans are now interested in finding their history, that we have a lot of organizations out there who are willing and ready to help you.
And
We
and
have
is this something that
conferences.
people have to pay for? Tell me about that, because people are gonna want to know, is it gonna cost me anything?
Okay, the societies might charge you maybe $20, $30 a year
Mm-hmm,
to cover the paperwork expenses stuff. But
mm-hmm,
pretty much that's this joining. It's like joining a society, joining a club.
mm-hmm,
So you pay dues.
mm-hmm,
But you can go to your local library. Your local library usually has a genealogy section. And
mm-hmm.
the lady or the gentleman who works that section, they're very gracious in helping you find, what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Like here in Orlando, Ocoee, we have a library. We have like 7, 8 rows of books just on genealogy alone of all the different states.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have to actually go to another state. Your local library might have books, genealogy books from other states, other history books from other states for you to study for. Man and Mission records I spoke about before. So the organizations, so they will have that in the library.
Okay. How do you even encourage collaboration and information sharing amongst the African-American genealogists and researchers?
Well, I personally compiled my information to this book.
Mm-hmm.
That was my main purpose in writing this book, is for future generations of researchers, so they didn't have to invent the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
So, and my book has been ordered by other researchers, so they'll look and see what I got and combine with what they have, and they'll put in what I missed.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's how then our research will get bigger and bigger. So it takes more than just one person, and because people will find other things that you might not found.
Yeah.
So we don't feel a resentment for them. We're all in the one purpose, is to get this information out there.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, and I saw you, Veronica, do you think people or our people, do you think African American people, do you think the more we learn, the more empowered we will become? Do you think we will take this information and be empowered as a people? Because that's what I hope. I know everybody's want to learn all these things for varied reasons, because I got far more reasons now that I talk to you to want to know, this, to glean all of this information. But do you think we will become an empowered people? Because I want that.
Stephanie, that question was for you.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought she was asking you. I'm sorry. I was trying to get this distraction from out of the kitchen. I'm sorry, what was your question again? I'm sorry.
Do you think that African American people, if we do learn more about who we are, do you think we will truly become a more empowered people? Do you think that's
Yes, I do.
Okay.
It's a self-esteem. The people are descended of the Hebrews.
Mm-hmm.
They go by what they learn from generation to generation, and they still feel that proudness, that who they are. They carry themselves, that's who they are. We didn't have that. Mm-hmm. So we have to start telling ourselves that. Mm-hmm. We want to say we start after 1870, after the slave. We didn't want to admit that we had ancestors that were enslaved. Mm-hmm. That was like a bad thing to say, that we had ancestors that were enslaved. Mm-hmm. But now we realize it, because we're putting out there that was our ancestors. They survived the transatlantic travel voyage and made it here. They survived 300 years of being enslaved. Mm-hmm. And made it here. Mm-hmm. Their children had to go through Reconstruction, where they were getting lynched and things, and they survived. Civil rights. So each stage, we have to honor and respect where we've been, to know who we are and where we're going. If we ignore all that, we're just here and say, hey, we got it, we made it. No, we're not. Yeah. We won't be togetherness until we respect where we come from.
Tell me what advice you'd give to someone who's struggling to find information about their African American ancestors.
Again, be patient and persistent. African American genealogy research can be challenging due to historical factors and limited records. Be prepared for setbacks. Don't get discouraged. Stay persistent, patient, and open to exploring different research avenues. Carefully review the information you have gathered and analyze it for potential leads. Look for clues, patterns, and inconsistencies that can guide your research in the right direction. Celebrate every small discovery along the way and appreciate the journey of uncovering your family's unique history.
So Veronica talked about, that fear that some have of what they may uncover. Have you encountered any surprises or unique or remarkable stories while uncovering African-American family histories?
And my piece of resistance of my book is James Dew, who I spoke about earlier, being the African-American patriot. He served for over 3 years and was a prisoner for the war for 11 months. The most important fact was that he was of African descent. When I first found him, I just naturally thought he was a white ancestor. I just assumed that. I assumed he must have had a mulatto or African or a Native American mother of his children, which I descend from, but I assumed that he was white. That's what was my mindset. This must be a white ancestor. But as I was researching him and looked through the census records, the 1790 census says he was Black, Negro. The 1810 census said he was Negro. So 10 years apart, census was saying he's Negro, so this man was Negro. So that was very important to find that. That he, like I said, he fought for his freedom from the British rule, but he also for the enslaved people, as he thought. One thing that doesn't really talk about is that Africans' descent have been fought in every war in America, every war, and each time they thought they were gonna get their freedom, and they didn't. They didn't, but they fought in every single war.
Before I get some final thoughts from you, and you kind of let us know one final time where we can get the book. Veronica, how have you been impacted by what you've uncovered about your family history and ancestry?
That's a great question. One of the things that I'm more proud of my features, and let me just say, when I did DNA testing, I found that I was 27% Nigerian. And then I did the research about Nigerians, how brilliant, intelligent, and smart they are. That made me feel empowered. I appreciated my strong cheekbones, and I appreciated my lips, and I appreciated my nose, and I even changed my whole hair structure to nappiness. So it has been a journey for me. When I first met Stephanie, I would inquire about this different DNA stuff, and she said something to me that was so profound, and that was, you have to take your own journey to Mecca. You have to do the research, and when you're ready to have this conversation with me, you can. Now, with that being said, can I ask Stephanie just one more question? But I know we're the time. Stephanie, we can feel the passion of what you're saying. So my question to you would be, is that your only book? Is there a second or a third or fourth volume?
Now, this is my first volume, and I did it very simple for my father. I wanted my 89-year-old father to read it. But the second volume will probably pretty much have everybody else in my family in it. It will go through Reconstruction. It will actually go through the Civil War, because it's ended in 1832. So it's going to be 1833 beyond. So I'm going to go through the Civil War, go through Reconstruction, civil rights of the ancestors who lived in Eastern Shore, Maryland. When I talked to my aunts, they didn't really know too much. That they really know that Frederick Douglass was in their backyard, because the schools, the classes didn't teach them that. And to know that Frederick Douglass is possibly a cousin now, a relative, But you know what? Her granddaughter is going to know that. Her great granddaughter is going to know that. So the ancestors, my aunts and my father didn't know at that time. Now they know in the elder age, but they know it now. But the main point is this: that their grandchildren, my great grandchildren, are going to know who we are. And like I said, history is not just Frederick Douglass in the Eastern Shore. It's my ancestors were there.
And we are at time. One more again. Where can we get this book? Pieces of Me, Patriotism by Stephanie Miller.
On Amazon.
On Amazon, that's where you can get it. And I will make sure that I post that as well on the Doctor2Doctor page. We are so honored that you would take time from your schedule to come and have this chat with us. I'm so grateful to you and to Veronica Nealy-Morris as well for coming and sharing this time with me. And I am so grateful, of course, to our Doctor to Doctor listening audience. You guys come back every Saturday and we appreciate you. And we will see you back here next Saturday, same chat channel, same chat time, right here on 94.7 FM. We will see you then.